My name is Charis Armour, and I am Pace's marketing manager. And on behalf of Pace International, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to Pace's first annual California Post-Harvest Academy online event series. We're in our second week today, and we're really excited that this is a virtual format, as it has allowed us to expand our horizon to invite customers from other latitudes, from Mexico, Argentina, and Chile, and of course, from California. Today and this coming Thursday, we'll be bringing you speakers that serve as excellent resources and thought leaders in the industry. Before we begin, let me share with you some housekeeping information. At the end of each speaker's presentation, you will have the opportunity to ask questions. Please send your text messages to the number on your screen. You can do this during and after their presentation, and I believe the number is coming across the screen. And if you scroll a little bit below the screen, you'll see that number as well. In between speakers, we will have a break. The next speaker will begin at 11 a.m. To view Thursday's speaker, Mary Lou Arpaio, all you have to do is use the same link that you used for these sessions to log in on Thursday at 10. We are here to share ideas, information, and to learn. We know that your time is valuable, and we greatly appreciate you spending your time with us. Now let me welcome our first speaker of the day, Lauren Scott. She's the Chief Strategy and Membership Officer of PMA. Lauren has more than 20 years of experience in consumer products in the consumer products industry. Prior to PMA, Lauren worked at PepsiCo and Diageo in a variety of marketing roles related to brand management, food service, activation, field marketing, national promotions, cultural branding, global innovation, and strategy. She is a self-described foodie, and Lauren's civic passions include combating food insecurities and perpetuating arts and culture. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Lauren today.
Charis, thank you so much for having me here today, and welcome everybody. As she said, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule for this important conversation. So today we're going to talk about the future of global produce consumption. So I'm going to take it in 3 sections. The first is talking about the current landscape. Second, I'm going to share with you some proprietary research that PMA has done over the last couple of years around consumption, so you can understand what the drivers are of why people eat food. And then finally, I'm going to end with a sneak peek for you on the cultural macro trends of research that we just completed on what's going to drive in the future. So for those who don't know, PMA stands for the Produce Marketing Association. Is a global trade association with members in 54 countries around the world. And our members span from all the way from seed developers and conceptors all the way up to the marketing agencies and everyone. And our vision is to bring together the global produce and floral community to grow a healthier world. And that healthier world is not only for our members, but for the industry and consumers at large. I love this concept of the Post-Harvest Academy that Pace International does, because it shows the importance of the stewardship, as I said, of the products to the consumer. So when you try to prepare for these conferences and you look at the other conversations that are being, the other presentations, and these are some things that are really impressive. I mean, most of the stuff I don't even understand as a marketer. It's regulatory and it's science and technology, and we had from PMA speak last week to the group. So really impressive, but think about the time and the energy and the stewardship that's required for people to actually implement these things on behalf of consumers to ensure products make it all the way through the supply chain. Because again, at the end of the day, of the work that people in the industry, all the work that you're doing, is to ensure that product gets through to the consumer for them to enjoy. So Pace International had 3 words that popped out to me on the site, and of focusing on what they're all about. And it's about enhance, protect, and preserve. Enhance, protect, and preserve. It almost sounds like it's a branch of the armed services of what they're doing for the produce. And really what that leads to is perpetual consumption. So that means that by making sure that we're constantly enhancing the product, protecting it, and preserving it, a consumer can bank on the quality that they will receive every time they buy the product. And the more that there's consistency and delight that a consumer can receive from produce, which we know, of course, is very variable, the more likely that they're going to use it to meet the jobs that they want to do. And we're going to talk about those jobs in the second part of the presentation. So let's talk about consumption. I want to define what that means in the context of what I'm talking about, because different people define consumption in different ways. So consumption defined falls into 3 buckets. The first is obviously things are planted and they're grown, and we'll just call it produced for now. And that means that the produce is moving from the field or from the facility into a retail and food service environment. So some people define that as consumption. I'm driving consumption by moving it from my warehouse. But then there's another part of consumption is now that the product has moved from the farm, it is in the retail or the food service space. So consumption is also defined by someone came in and they bought or they pulled the product through out of the retail or food service establishment. Some people call that consumption. The third area of consumption, which I'm going to focus primarily on for this presentation, is the actual consumer, either the person who bought the product or the person bought the product to give to their family or their friends. And that's the product that's actually consumed by humans. So what is consumed and actually eaten? So we're going all the way to the end of the supply chain for this conversation. And I love the concept of this also is post-harvest. It's all the way at the tail end of that process. Because what we have to remember is that while there's a lot of science that goes into produce and food safety and technology and supply chain, at the end of the day, produce is part of food. It is a food category. And it's important for us to take the time to think of ourselves as being in the food business, not just in the agricultural business. And that's particularly important when we're about the consumer. So before we get into the details, I'd like to step back and to level set all of us on the truth of the products of produce. Because there is some inconsistency that we have to reconcile as we start to think about how do we drive consumption, global consumption of produce. The fact is that eating fruits and vegetables is the single most important thing that people can do to live a full and vibrant life. And the fact is the world is not eating enough. No matter which country you go to, people are not eating enough fruits and vegetables. And it comes down to 2 factors. The first factor is lack of access. And there's no reason why in this day and age that people cannot have enough fruits and vegetables readily available they can afford. Certainly during this pandemic, us in the produce industry saw the impact when the supply chain stopped. We had a member that talked about when the dance stopped, how everything came to a halt. It affected what happened in the field, but it also affected what happened to consumers. And through the USDA box program and through other initiatives, we were able to start to pull product through from the field and to get it to consumers that really needed it. But this issue of access didn't just happen and occur because we're in a pandemic. It's systemic and something that we as an industry need to continue to fight all over the world to ensure that people have enough nutritional food to eat. Now, the second issue of why people aren't eating enough produce is something that we all have more control over, and actually you can argue is more concerning. So among people that know produce is healthy, know its benefits, they're choosing not to eat produce for whatever reason, and they're making other choices. So when we think about how do we actually drive global produce consumption, we need to think about how do we make sure that we frame our products not only as healthy, but as the way for people all over the world, no matter their age, to live a full and vibrant life. Because ultimately, that's the job that produce does. That's the job that it's proven to do, and that's what we can continue to deliver. And in this age of the pandemic, when people are thinking more about their health, they're cooking more at home, they're having more consideration about their meals, if for nothing else, because they have nothing else to do. This idea of wellness and immunity is becoming a bigger trend now than it has ever before. And produce is perfectly positioned to help consumers meet that need. So now I want to shift gears and talk about some of the work that PMA does. And aside from the work that we do in food safety and sustainability and technology, we also spend a considerable amount of time looking at consumer trends, what are the occasions, cultural shifts that help to drive the business. And I love this picture because it reminds us of what we try to do every day, that we need to try to predict and see what the needs are in the future when we don't even know what that's going to look like. But that's essentially the job of what we have to do as people who are looking into the future or studying consumers, is to anticipate what their needs are going to be in the future. So there's several inputs. On the internal side, we use our global membership as a great resource for PMA. We have subject matter experts. There's volunteers that contribute to the thinking, and then do primary research. And some of that primary research I'll show you today. But we also look outside of PMA in the industry to look at media trends, of course, subject matter experts, social platforms, and there's also great global research that we mine fastidiously to make sure that we're understanding what's happening in the market. So I want to go through these trends that we're going through right now. The first area is around the global landscape, and it really boils down to politics, economic power, and trade. And this doesn't matter which country you're in. It's not about what party affiliation you may have or what your beliefs are. These are the things that are driving global sentiment. And the key headline is this idea of we are living in the unknown. And I would say last year we were living in the unknown, and this pandemic has added even another layer of living in the unknown. Last year, what are the political landscape? How is it going to play out? What are the trade issues that are going to sort out? That was really on a macro scale. Now, each of us are living in a very micro scale of the unknown. When will I be able to get on a plane? When will I be able to leave my house and resume life as I knew it? And no one can answer that question, which leads to uncertainty. On top of all of that, there are, like I said, these huge issues that are affecting the world all over. There's protectionism in multiple countries. There's this desire. Now that has slowed down, obviously, because of the pandemic. There's the threat of war and of bombing in different parts of the country, and violence and violence that could ensue. There's the fires that you have experienced in California. It seems like every year it can't get worse, and it just seems like it gets worse every year. Brexit is on the road to try to get resolved at the end of this year with the EU. And of course, we've heard this phrase, the new normal, which at this point, who even knows what that means? I would say that we're living in normal. This is the normal that we're living in, and we need to figure out how we navigate those waters instead of waiting for something to happen. As I said earlier, particularly for our industry, and particularly for the countries that are here on this in this academy today, this idea of trade and trade relations is completely different than it was before, and we'll have to see where this all plays out. in terms of how it, with the elections and in terms of product. But this has a very big impact, particularly on the categories that you have, on export potential and domestic and consumption. Because when consumers cannot, again, rely on products consistently, then that starts to shift their consumption behavior. So this is something that we all need to watch. Now, that's the heavy stuff. I want to kind of get into some other trends that are a little bit closer to our business. And let's talk about the industry landscape. So obviously, the idea of retail is now being driven by our phones. It's being driven by technology. And that was happening before, but the pandemic has accelerated that to a great degree. And when you think about retailing, it's not just what I'm getting in the store, but it's the technology that's behind it that's driving it. Even in food service, which has been incredible and still to this day is facing considerable headwinds, a lot of the business in takeout is driven by technology. And that's only going to accelerate because it's actually served a need for the consumers. So shopping has truly been reinvented, and what we think about in how we shop and where we shop and what we want to get is different. And several retailers who were on the forefront of some of the technology are finding that they're in a good position where others are in a position of catching up. And it shows that if you have one or two bad experiences of doing online shopping, a consumer could switch stores. So it's very, very important in the retail space that we deliver this. And I say this in another speech that I talk about this phase. We don't sell Tide, where it doesn't matter where you get it or how you treat it, it's always going to be the same. We're selling produce. So the care and the consideration that each of the people that works along the supply chain post-harvest has with our products is critical, not only to the consumer experience, but also to the reputation of the retailer. Food and tech is something that's becoming much closer. And it was very interesting because for a while it seemed the idea of tech and food, the Frankenfood concept was getting a little scary. But what we're seeing, particularly through this pandemic, is that people are now being much more pragmatic on the benefits that technology can have on the food and the food system. And people are taking more care to think about what's happening at the farm level, what's happening in the store. So technology is seen as being an enabler and is seen as a way of preserving resources, which is a little bit different than we've seen in the past. And on the flip side of that is transparency. Consumers want to know not only where their food came from because it was, it was nice to know. People sometimes say the farmer becomes the mascot. We've moved on from that phase. Consumers really want to understand, particularly now because in the early part of COVID, it was a safety concern. We had gone down on Maslow's hierarchy of needs where people were very concerned about their basic safety. But now people want to have transparency because they're having consideration about what's going in their body. They also want to have transparency because they're thinking about who are the companies that they're buying from and they're doing business from. So transparency doesn't mean that you necessarily tell everybody everything. There was a very interesting conference that I participated where we spent some time talking about transparency. And the fact is that there's a lot of information that companies have that consumers don't really care about. So transparency isn't just telling everybody everything, but really thinking about who are your consumers, what are the needs they're trying to do, and what information can you convey that can actually help them in their purchase decisions of your product. And so this is something that will not go away. And the other piece that's emerging is this idea of tech in the workplace and tech's role in the workplace. For a while there was this sense that the machines were going to take over and they were going to rise. And you do see this. There's a shift in work where work that's more manual is actually moving more to automation. And so that requires a different type of workforce long-term in the future. I would say, particularly because of this year with the pandemic and in this country with the social unrest, the employee in the workplace is going to shift to not only be able to do a job, but it's going to have something that machines cannot do that we very sorely need, and that's having empathy and caring. So you're going to see over the long term, the employees that are going to do well and they're going to be sought after in companies are not only the ones that have the functional excellence, but also have what was traditionally called the soft skills or the people skills or those empathy skills, because that's what it's going to require, where you have these teams of people that are not just doing widgets, but actually needing to problem solve and drive real change. The next area I want to talk about are consumer expectations, and we touched a little bit on it before, but I'll go into some more detail here. So this idea of healthy living has been around for many years, and it's not going away, and it's a good thing to see if you're in the produce industry. People are still very interested in having healthy lifestyles, and it goes back to what we talked about living that full and vibrant life. The other piece that people want to do is to have ethical living. And it's not only about what am I doing at my house, but what is the impact of my decisions on the total system. The other piece around food is mindful eating. And when I think about mindful eating, I call these the SANs. So there's the egg-free, the gluten-free, the peanut-free, the flour-free. People are navigating from certain foods that they're trying to avoid that they think are helping their lifestyle. And they're looking for qualifiers. So these are things like local or organic or bio or homegrown to show the efficacy of products. These things are not going away. And even if products are imported from other countries, they're still looking for provenance because this helps to give the sense of quality. The other thing we're seeing a lot of are food movements. And it used to be that there would be like a fad diet that would come through every 5-10 years. And now we're seeing these food tribes where people are figuring out what is the mix of food that I want to eat that helps to not only help me be healthy, but also fit my lifestyle and fit the ethical values that we talked about earlier. So some examples are veganism, or you'll see paleo, or you'll hear keto, Mediterranean, and you'll see these products start to proliferate in consumer packages. So you know when a fad has really hit it if you can go to Starbucks and they're talking about keto, or it's getting on consumer packaged products. And again, the reason why people are doing that is what we talked about, is why people eat is because they want to live a full and vibrant life. And that's what they're looking for through the food movements. So, that's all that's going on. And again, it's like we've got the rock with the cell phone. You're like, okay, well, what do we do with all that information? That's to give you the context of the world that we all are living in. And so the question still becomes, so how do we drive consumption of produce? And what that did, it required PMA to say, well, let's step back and do some research to understand not how are we going to increase more produce, but why do people eat produce? More importantly, why do people eat food? Because if you remember where we started, we are actually in the food business when you're thinking about it through the lens of the consumer. So what makes the consumer choose one product over another was the key question we wanted to find out. Because ultimately it comes down to the choices that consumers make and making sure they're reaching for produce more frequently, which is going to help us drive demand and consumption through all of those touch points. So there were two pieces of work that we did, and if anybody listening is a PMA member, you can go onto the website and you have access to these. The first I'm going to talk about is the study, the Beyond Health study. And this was a very, very large study with over 7,000 respondents to get an understanding, not overtly asking people, why are you eating products? But they have a methodology. The company that we use, Sentient, has a methodology, to mine and understand why people are making their food choices. And so what we did is we tested 56 different food items. So you could see we had fruits and we had vegetables. And of course, this is not the comprehensive list, but it's illustrative. But we also had beverages and salty snacks and other sweets and other foods. Again, the object is to understand, why are people picking different foods and what job they're looking for that food to do. But if we can unlock the job they're looking for foods to do, then we know how to position our products to see if they can also do those jobs to be potential substitutes and competitors, but also for us to help us drive consumption. Just as a general rule, my personal approach is I don't believe in food fights. I believe that if we want to compete and we have to grow, then we need to do it on our own merit, and understanding the drivers of why people eat food is a method to do that. So we looked at different types of products within in the study. We looked at ones that had higher reach and frequency, like bananas. That's a very high household penetration. A lot of people eat bananas, and a lot of people eat lettuce, and a lot of people eat pizza and French fries, for example. And we also looked at things that had a lower reach, so pomegranates or beets or protein, because we wanted to have a mix of different types of products. And we asked people different attributes of how they would describe the foods that we had in the 56 foods that we had in the study. You can see it runs the gamut from affordable or modern or smooth or low energy or high energy, because we want to get as much differentiation in those descriptions. And then what we also did is we asked them to think about those attributes in context. So we didn't say, here's an apple, what are the attributes? We asked people to think about what they were eating when they're looking for what attributes, and why and when and where, so we can understand the context that people eat food to understand these products. So as you can imagine, with these types of studies, you get the report and it's 176 pages, but it all boils down to there was one area that was most profound, is the word that I like to use. And we called this the taxonomy of food association. And so what we did is we plotted the regions. You can see there's the what do I cognitively think about something, and then what do I experience are the two axes. So what you'll see here there are 7 areas of why people eat food. This is not just produce. This is all food. Why people eat food is because they're looking for something healthy, dependable, popular and in the know, revitalizing a specific flavor, something rich, or something to meet a specific emotional state. So this is what was most sobering for the produce industry. For years, we've been talking about produce as healthy, and the truth is produce absolutely is healthy. But what should pop out to you is that if we're only putting produce in one box or in one circle, that means we're missing out on the opportunity to drive sales in the other 6 circles. And the fact is that produce is not only healthy, but it can also deliver on some of these other needs. And I'll give you a perfect example, which is avocados. So think about avocados. If you ask the people who worked on avocados about 20, 25 years ago, it was nowhere where it is right now in terms of popularity, and certainly not in terms of volume, and certainly not in terms of reach. But let's unpack why avocados is as big as it is right now through the taxonomy of food association. So they did the research that showed that the fat in avocados is actually healthy fat. It's good fat for you. So that check that circle. Then think about what the benefit of that fat is. That fat gives a richness and a creaminess, which is a desire that you see on that taxonomy. Because there was more, people were now open to buying avocados, then you had more people who were growing it. So you had more people who were looking post-harvest of how do we grow it? How do we pick it? How do we care for it? How do we make sure that we're selling it pre-riped? So it became very dependable. It's similar to what we talked about, what Pace International is trying to help us do, is post-harvest, how do we make sure that we are delivering a product consistently that you can bank on, which is what the avocado industry did. And then finally, of course, it's popular and it's in the know and it's in culture. So now it's fashionable to be seen eating avocados in multiple occasions, whether it's for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner, for a snack. And that's why avocados are so big. So what you do is you think about, okay, well, if this can happen for avocados, think about other categories and how do we start to remove the barriers to grow consumption. Now, and anybody who's done research, you know that there's there's always, you think that, oh, I think if we can just cut the data, that there'll be differences across people. And what was very sobering is no matter what age, what demographic, where people lived, there was no difference in the taxonomy. There was no difference in the taxonomy, which shows that at the end of the day, we're all the same when it comes to our metaphysical needs. And so if we can tap into that, into the drivers of why people eat food, then that's how we're going to grow consumption. And so I want to make sure it's clear. I'm not saying that produce is not healthy. Produce absolutely is healthy, but we have an opportunity to break out and be more than just healthy. And it requires us to look at our category with fresh eyes and help to deliver the joy for people to live a full and vibrant life with produce. The other study that we did, it was in multiple countries, and it's called The Drivers and Barriers of Produce Consumption. And we did it in Australia, Brazil, China, South Africa, and the United States, and we're slated to do it in Mexico next year. And what was interesting about this is that even though metaphysically we're all the same, each country and culture has different food philosophies. And so you could see some of them here in the United States. What the biggest driver of our food philosophy here in the US is taste. Where in South Africa, they look for foods that are going to meet a function. So if I'm going to work out, I'm going to eat food that's going to help me fuel that moment. In China, they understand the seasons of food, and they understand and they eat food that are going to help to give them different benefits. In Australia, it was very interesting because either they're going to have a good day or they're going to have a bad day. Usually Monday through Thursday, they're eating very healthy, and then it all goes downhill on the weekend. And in Brazil, it's about the flavor and the enhancement and the freshness. And understanding the drivers of why people eat food and enhancing that, as well as removing any barriers, is another way on a cultural level by country that we can help to drive consumption. So that's the section of the primary research. And again, if you're a PMA member, please feel free to visit our website to read the studies in detail. But before I close out, I want to give each of you a peek under the tent of some research that we just completed that is looking really far out at some macro trends. And we worked with a cultural agency called Sparks and Honey to ask a pretty meaningful question. What are the global shifts in culture that will impact the growth of consumption and produce? And so the way they have their process, they're looking at things that are very slow moving macro trends that are 10 to 15 years out. And so despite the fact that we're in a pandemic, and despite the fact of all the things I talked about at the beginning of the political situation and the unrest and the protectionism and the fires, these macro trends will not change, and these are things that you should keep on your radar. So I'll tick through them quick. The report is going to be released over the next couple of weeks. So the 5 global shifts that will impact the future of produce are as follows. The first is globalization 4.0. It feels like we've been globalizing for a long time. But really what this is going to come down to is brands evaluating their supply chains and looking at their sourcing. What's going to be local? What's going to come from global? How do we tap into those qualifiers that we talked about? How do we ensure that the consumers have a consistent supply across the supply chain? And also, consumers are more looking for products that are coming from around the world. As before the pandemic, travel and experience, particularly through food, was a very strong trend. And the taste for different types of foods are only going to increase. So globalization 4.0 is one of the drivers. The second cultural trend is population diversification. And this goes to people looking at how they eat. So remember earlier we talked about what are the food tribes or the food philosophies. This idea of personalized eating regimens is only going to grow. And the more that people have opportunities to do different testing, learn more about their DNA, you're going to see that people are going to be choosing foods that they believe help to fuel them. So instead of eat X product because it's good for you, people are now in the macro, people are now going to be trying to understand what that means specifically for them and their body, for their body type. Because again, everybody's trying to live that full and vibrant life. The third cultural trend is around precision technology. We talked a little bit about this also in the presentation, that there's going to be tremendous advancements in technology. And I think that this pandemic has helped to spur that, because people have seen the benefit, and more importantly, even in first world countries, they've felt the fear of not being able to have enough food, of not having access to food, and not having access to the food that they want. So this is going to open up a lot of different questions about not only in seed development, but also in processing. Imagine if every facility had robots that were picking and packing the fields, then you wouldn't have had anybody concerned about, well, who's touching my product in the grocery store. So you're going to see more investment in this area that is continuing to boom, but it will continue to grow. The fourth is about climate adaptation, and this is happening obviously all around the world. We talked about that people are looking for ethical living, and so as climate change continues to happen and it continues to be part of a conversation, we'll have to understand how that's going to have impact on the global food supply and what that means for production and what that means for local and provenance. And this is a continuing conversation, and it's quite frankly a very complicated conversation, because we can't have something that's so blunt that doesn't really help to affect the change in each individual area. And then finally, accelerated urbanization. And when we shared this a couple weeks ago at a town hall, people said, well, people seem to be moving out of the cities. And again, these are 15 long-term trends. And yes, people are moving out of the cities temporarily because they want to get more space. But urban centers are going to continue to grow because that's where the jobs are. And even if people move out of a major city and they're going to the suburb, they're not living out in the hinterlands. People will continue to congregate. So then it's a question of, how do societies change, and what's the impact on where you're growing and what you're growing and what the expectations are. We talked about retail being tied to technology, and it's really driven by your phone. Think about how retailing will change with this accelerated urbanization. So with that, I would like to thank each of you for the time that you spent. I'd be happy to answer any questions about the topics in this presentation, or any other questions related to the consumer. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lauren, so very much. I do have a couple of questions, and I want to encourage folks to go ahead and share their questions by texting them to the number below your screen. Lauren, one of the first questions, how has the global pandemic changed the demand for fresh produce over the past few months?
So in the early part of the pandemic, that was the key question. So we actually did some studies that we fielded about every 2 weeks in multiple countries. I think it was China, Brazil, the US, and the UK, to understand what the impact of consumption was. So the good news is that consistently consumers bought produce because they recognized that produce was helping, one, because they were cooking more at home, and two, they recognized that it was the benefit to their health. What the initial concerns were around safety. In the United States, is the product safe? Who's touching it? You know, you had the wacky person telling you to wash your produce in bleach. I mean, none of that is ever helpful. But the industry very quickly shifted to packaged products, which you saw a surge in. We were going away from packaging, and then there was a shift to getting products in packaging. So that helped to give a sense of comfort. But also, quite frankly, even for bulk sales, the retailers and food service operators did a tremendous job of ensuring the customers that the products are safe. So we never really saw a dip. What you did see is a massive mix shift. So I would say on the macro, produce could be down this year. One, because of when the supply chain shifted, things that were going to food service, they couldn't get routed to retail in time. So while retail sales surged and you almost couldn't get supply on some products, in food service, the bottom completely dropped out overnight, and that hasn't evened out. If you think about all the product that goes through food service channels, whether it's hotels or restaurants or amusement parks or airports, all that volume, or not all that volume, but so much of that volume is still suppressed. So where you're seeing it depends on where you sit in what your customer base is and how you're doing. If you were all retail, or if you were selling to a QSR, if you used to have a pizza shop, you're printing money because those places are doing very well. If your business was in fine dining or in airlines, or then you're hurting. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, it does. And then what types of fruits, in your estimation, are on the rise?
So right now, if we're talking about living in this COVID world, vitamin C. If your product has vitamin C, it's on the rise. Now, what's interesting is there's so many products that are very high in vitamin C, but people don't know it. So at least in the United States, the default was, okay, oranges. So oranges surged. Lemons, you couldn't get a lemon. You couldn't get ginger you couldn't get garlic in the first part of COVID. So if you're out there, if you're selling kiwis, or if that's there's tremendous story behind that product, and they're very well positioned. If you think back to that taxonomy and avocados, they're really hitting on a couple of those areas. So I think that's going to surge. I mean, apples are always popular. Pears are coming back. The Pear Bureau has some great work that they're doing. The cherry business has been strong. There's no product. I'm trying to look at the sheet, the sell sheet in my mind to see, is there anybody that's down? There really was. Grapes are doing strong. I mean, there's no category that's soft, or even if your category is soft, I would say there's really no reason it should be. There's probably some other factor that's going on, but consumers are eating a variety. Certainly global consumers are eating a variety, and they're interested in fruits and produce that are coming from other parts of the world too.
Thank you. One of the things that I recognized in the presentation was the talk of ethical living. And, sustainability has been such a key buzzword over the years that I'm wondering if that shift was, in talking about ethical living, if that was a conscious effort on your part, and more making sustainability more of a holistic approach instead of just a buzzword for marketing.
Yes. You mean the rationale of saying ethical living versus just saying?
Yeah, I appreciated that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a very good point, because sustainability is such a big word. And again, if you're thinking about a consumer, it comes down to them. So we actually did some research last year looking at sustainability. And what do growers think of sustainability, and what are the practices they're doing, and what are the messages they're trying to drive? And then we did research with consumers. What it comes down to, it's fascinating, because if you're on a facility, the sustainability that you need to do really has to fit with where you are, what kind of business you're doing, and where you're going to see improvements. And I actually think it's very personal. And so I get concerned when there are these mass legislations of what everybody needs to do, or these audits, everybody needs to do X, when in reality, that may not be what an individual operation needs to do to have sustainability practices. But from a consumer, really how they define sustainability is themselves. Again, people want to live a full and vibrant life. And so the sustainability is so they can live in perpetuity if they could. It's about their longevity. So I think it was last year or 2 years ago, there was a great poster. I need to try to Google it and find it. And the woman was holding the poster. She said, "I never thought I'd die this hot." And I think that was a perfect articulation of how consumers view sustainability. It's very personal to their own life and living a long life. So they don't want to do anything that they think is going to impede them living a long life. The other thing that's interesting with sustainability is like the straws and the turtles. I mean, all of a sudden it just, that went away as soon as COVID hit. But I will tell you that sustainability is not going away. So if you've started to implement sustainable practices in your company, continue to do that, continue to double down, because the retailers that's important to are not letting up. And as soon as we get through this phase, it's going to come back up. I do think that what the pandemic, if there's any good in the pandemic, it's helped us to be more pragmatic in the role of different products. So plastics was getting a really bad name, and now all of a sudden we see that it has a functional role. And I think that in the end, that will help.
Okay, that's really fascinating. Thank you for that answer. Looks like we just have one more question, unless I encourage anyone who wants to share another question, please do so now. What role do you see service companies like Pace, what role do you see they may have in the future of produce consumption?
Oh, they have, I mean, a tremendous role. I mean, I can't remember now, enhance, protect, and I'm forgetting the third one. I mean, it's the stewardship of the product. I mean, think about it, if a grower grows a product, or they plant a tree and it grows and they harvest, and if you can't get it through the supply chain consistently with flavor that's safe, that looks beautiful, either if it's at retail or it's serviceable at food service, and it gets to the consumer and they don't eat it, what a waste of, you talk about food waste, what a waste of talent and resources and ability and effort. It's almost on the cusp of being disrespectful. So service providers like a Pace International, and quite frankly the whole supply chain, has a tremendous responsibility to not just grow product and sell it in the store. You have to understand, we are really saving lives. We are contributing to the livelihood and the well-being of the world. And so I say that not to be hyperbolic, but I say that because that's really the business we're in. We are in the food business that is feeding the world the nutrients that they need to not only survive, but to thrive.
Wow, that's a beautiful way to end the presentation. I appreciate your enthusiasm, and what a great ending to already a fantastic time with you, Lauren. We really do appreciate and value the time that you spent with us and our customers today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And this is a good segue. I'll let everyone know that that we're going into break until the top of the hour at 11. And we have Scott Christie from Pace International, who will be talking about technology, sustainability, and automation today. So I think that is a great segue. So we look forward to seeing you back at 11 a.m. Thank you so much.